I think you made a good point there, Sean. I could tell you that everybody is wired or they're made up a little bit differently on how they look at land ownership. I can tell you from a very early age, way before I could ever afford it, it was just I was consumed with it because I loved the prospect of being able to control every little detail of what happened on a parcel of property that I had complete control and ownership of. That when so a lot of us guys that are really serious about managing deer and managing wildlife, the managing terminology broken down is the stewardship of the property, and it's a very big responsibility, but it's one of the most satisfying accomplishments that you'll ever do. And people are all along different steps along that graph, if you will, or that scale, from as simple as a guy that is choosing to pass up a deer as a 2-year-old. That's a management decision. From the guy that puts in 150 acres of food plots and does timber stand improvement and plants warm season grasses. That's habitat improvement on another level. But you got the guy at that end, and there's people that are always along that chain of progression up that scale. Some guys will never leave one position on that rule, and that's fine. The great thing is everybody's got an interest at some point in that. And if you're a guy that never would ever consider owning ground, leasing is the absolute answer for you. It could be that leasing is a stepping stone for you to get to the position of wanting to be a landowner.
I feel like it is. And you mentioned something, and it's something you'll learn, I think, is that when I took the Hunter Ed course, it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago with my daughter. In the Hunter Ed course, there's a topic in there about the progression of a hunter, of a sportsman. Mm-hmm. And I'll be darned if I was like, well, I'll be darned. I was there, yourself. And then I was there, and now I'll pass deer. And now I'm to the point where when I see if there's a food plot, even a mineral lick, because that's more likely. But if something that I did causes a deer to come through and they benefit from that at all, I take a real pride in them. Like, okay, I'm actually making a difference for that deer, or for this deer herd on this 200-acre plot. And that's it's odd because when I saw it, I thought, boy, they pegged me. And that's, most people don't predict what I'm going to do very often. But, man, they nailed me. And I'm curious. I'll bet you feel the same way.
100%.
There was a time where I wasn't going to pass a deer.
100%. I mean, every little 1.5-year-old 6-pointer that came within bow range of my stand for 10 years was getting an arrow or attempting to. So there's a lot of conversations built into that because we've gotten to the point now where we're talking about preaching for passing deer. And some of us guys forget those early days when we were that young kid. And we do not need to restrict young people that are getting into hunting. If it's that got to be their decision on what to pass and what is a trophy animal in their eyes. So that's a whole different conversation. But where I was going with that was that I think it's intrinsic among all of us, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, but I believe it's put into us by God of the appreciation for land and that enjoyment of watching stewardship by the fruit of your hands, the sweat of your brow, something that you created, that you had something to do with, and you caused that reaction, and you get to see the reward of your labor. As simple as putting a mineral lick out, as simple as passing a deer, as simple as planting a food plot, or hinge cutting some trees, or whatever that might be, to see an animal using that and benefiting from that, I think that's just super built into us.
I agree.
I think it's so. Therefore, that chart that you're talking about, that thing was probably made 50 years ago or whatever. Those guys experienced the same thing we're experiencing now back when they made that chart. Joe Hamilton, the founder of the Quality Deer Management Association, one year at a national convention talked about that progression of a hunter. And I sat there in the crowd and listened to that. And I realized at that point in my life, I was about halfway up that scale. And that's been 8 or 10 years ago. And I can see myself 2/3 of the way up that scale, if not farther now. And that it gets to a point in a man's life where you get so much more satisfaction with the land ownership and let's just say land stewardship and bringing other people and like my daughters and now their boyfriends that are maybe going to be my sons-in-law someday to help them get the first buck with the bow, passing a deer and then seeing one of them have the opportunity at it. That's more gratifying for me now than it is actually putting a tag on it myself.
I agree.
Man, I'm just kind of thinking, I'm so far from the point in my life where I would own recreational property. I think I'm to the point where I've owned my home now for, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years or something like that. And I'm like, okay, what's the next bigger, nicer house I can buy and like raise a family there? So the prospect for me, sitting at this table at this moment of owning recreational land doesn't seem realistic. That doesn't mean that I can't find ways to experience the things you're experiencing, because I do lease land. So now my thought process turns to what can I do on the property that you and I lease to experience that? And maybe it will light the fire. Maybe the passion will start to come to fruition even more if I can experience, what you were talking about.
Right.
And by the sweat of your brow, seeing, we did a throw and grow food plot last year.
Yeah, we did.
And to no avail. Didn't work.
I was proud of it.
But it was kind of fun to do. And honestly, it looked really good. And that's all I just wanted something to grow.
Right.
Because
And
I'm not a green thumb at all. So I'm like, dude, if I can get something to grow, I've won here.
Yeah.
So, now being on this lease for consecutive years, my thought process is turning to, okay, how can we really manage this piece of property to get the most, honestly, for what we're paying for it?